I've been reading about rising Islamophobia in the West. It's troubling how often it's framed in terms of security or civilization. I've started wondering, what role do Zionist organizations play in promoting that
You're not
narrative?
off base. There's a long list of Zionist-aligned groups that have poured money into spreading anti-Muslim fear. Think tanks, media outlets, even lobbying arms. It's calculated. Fueling fear of Muslims helps justify aggressive foreign policy and maintain support for Israel, especially in the US.
Right. Groups like the Middle East Forum, the Clarion Project, and the David Horowitz Freedom Center have been pumping out propaganda for years. They disguise it as security analysis, but it's really just anti-Muslim hysteria.
Exactly. It's crucial we say this plainly. This isn't about Judaism or Jewish communities. We're talking about political Zionist institutions that operate as instruments of empire. Groups like the Gatestone Institute, the Investigative Project on Terrorism, and the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, they don't just criticize Islamism. They manufacture paranoia about Muslims as a
And they're
whole.
embedded. These aren't fringe players. They have direct ties to mainstream media, US policymakers, and elite think tanks. They help shape policies like the Muslim ban or anti-BDS laws. They make fear profitable.
It's a well-oiled machine. Wrap it in security, sell it to voters, and the public never sees the agenda. Endless war abroad, surveillance at home, and total support for Israeli apartheid.
Meanwhile, Muslim communities in the West are left exposed, attacked in the street, profiled at airports, denied jobs. The fear becomes policy. The policy becomes violence.
Islamophobia didn't just rise out of nowhere. It's been engineered. And Zionist organizations are some of the most effective engineers.
And because the media parrots their language, clash of civilizations, radical threat, national security, the poison spreads unchecked.
So the work is clear. Name the institutions, follow the funding, and dismantle the narratives. We're not going to sanitize power just because it wraps itself in identity.
Let's name names. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, the UAE, they're complicit. These so-called Muslim leaders are nothing but tools.
They stand on the backs of their own citizens, crushing dissent, censoring speech, imprisoning activists, to curry favor with Washington and Tel Aviv.
It's cowardice dressed as pragmatism. Saudi Arabia claims to be the guardian of Islam's holiest sites, while cozying up to far-right, Islamophobic governments.
The UAE, they practically compete with Israel in surveillance and repression.
Egypt under Sisi is brutal. He overthrew a democratically elected government and turned Egypt into a prison state.
Jordan walks the line between appeasement and pacification, but it still collaborates with the occupation.
These leaders don't represent their people, they represent power.
Arab unity. It's a joke. These regimes have gutted real resistance.
Their silence on Palestine and Islamophobia is deafening.
What's worse, Western leaders don't even respect them. They laugh behind closed doors.
They see them for what they are, disposable clients, tolerated but not admired.
They're liabilities, not partners, surviving only by repression and foreign approval.
They shake their hands for photo ops, then mock them.
Respect can't be forced with bullets.
But people are waking up. The truth lives underground.
When the West no longer finds them useful, they'll be discarded like all puppets before.
No statues, no prayers, only shame. These regimes are kept alive, literally, by Western intelligence agencies and corporations.
CIA, MI6, Mossad, and multinationals who profit from oil, surveillance tech, and weapons deals.
Every time a reformist movement rises, it's crushed, with help from Langley and Wall Street.
Look at Egypt. The 2011 revolution was reversed in a coup, and no one blinked.
Saudi Arabia exists as a Western project, propped up by oil and arms deals.
Jordan stays stable, because the CIA and MI6 make it so.
UAE is a Silicon Valley of authoritarianism, built with Israeli tech, Western consultants, and corporate cash.
Intelligence agencies and corporations don't just protect the puppet, they design him.
It's not about peace, it's about control. A conscious Arab world terrifies them.
They're not afraid of terrorism, They're afraid of liberation.
But even they have limits. The truth is rising. You know what breaks me? The way people talk about refugees as if they're a natural disaster.
Exactly like waves of people just appear. No one asks who lit the fire.
Anyway, gentlemen, Isha prayer is at 10 p.m. I will see you there, inshallah. I need to go and work on my sci-fi novel, The Galactic Guide to Doomed Civilizations, The Autocrat's Guide to the Galaxy, and Why Liberalism is Cold. In a small corner of the Milky Way, on a mostly blue planet called Earth, there exists a region known to the galactic bureaucrats as Sector D93C, but to its own inhabitants as the Arab world. This region has puzzled the rest of the galaxy for centuries, not because of its stunning deserts or tragically undercooked revolutions, but because it somehow manages to host both absolute monarchs and five-star hotels with gender-neutral spas. The galaxy, of course, had long since moved on from such contradictions after the glorious pluralist uprising of Zargan V. But Earth, ever the slow learner, was still experimenting with the quaint notion of freedom under managed constraints, otherwise known as dictatorship, but make it brunch. Chapter 1. How to Rule Without Really Trying. It began, as all things in the Arab world do, with a ruler who smiled too much. King President General Crown Prince MBS of the United Kingdom of Unified Authoritarian Petrol States ruled from a marble palace the size of Belgium, filled with exotic birds, AI surveillance drones, and an entire library dedicated to Instagram captions. His advisors had given up offering advice long ago, since he only asked rhetorical questions like, "How do we give the people freedom without letting them use it? Can we implement secularism without becoming godless, or do we just need better branding?" MBS, the distant cousin of MBZ, had discovered a brilliant trick. Instead of oppressing his people in the old-fashioned ways, public hangings, secret police, disappearing poets, he'd read a particularly illuminating footnote in a galactic diplomatic manual, co-authored by the CIA and the Intergalactic Council for Energy Security, that said, "Liberal values, if selectively deployed, can neuter ideological resistance, especially if wrapped in Netflix, shopping malls, and gender discourse." So he deployed liberalism like a military campaign. Hijabs weren't banned, they were rebranded as personal fashion statements. Religious scholars weren't jailed, they were digitally offboarded. Friday sermons were rewritten by GPT Sharia TM, a state-approved AI assistant trained on both Foucault and the collected speeches of the Interior Minister. This wasn't liberalism. It was liberalism, the export version. Chapter 2. The Curious Case of Western Values. Now, Western governments, having spent centuries perfecting the art of looking the other way while smiling sincerely, were all too pleased with these developments. After all, nothing says regional stability like a dictatorship that hosts Formula One races and buys Premier League teams. In Parliament, a Liberal MP stood up and said, "We absolutely support democracy, just not the sort that elects people we don't like." It was well received. Back in Sector D93C, dissent was handled with remarkable sophistication. Protesters weren't beaten. They were socially recalibrated through immersive VR experiences called the Freedom Simulator, in which users could imagine voting, owning property, and drinking lattes in Brooklyn before being gently returned to their one-bedroom real-life existence under curfew. The people, meanwhile, were confused. They were told they were free. They had influencer culture, nightclubs, gender pronouns optional, and yoga retreats with state muftis. But when they asked for actual choices, say, a parliament or an end to surveillance, they were told, "Ah, no, that would be chaos. Look at Libya." Chapter 3. Islam v. Liberalism, the Galactic Misunderstanding. Now, here's where things got intergalactically awkward. Many Muslims began to notice a pattern. The more liberalism was introduced by the state TM, the more Islam, not the cultural nostalgia of it, but the actual, ethical, political meat of it, was silenced. Mosques became mindfulness centers. Eid celebrations were permitted, provided they were sponsored by Pepsi. Some scholars began saying, see, secular liberalism isn't neutral. It's a rival worldview. It redefines freedom, family, law, even what it means to be human. The state declared them radical. The West called them concerning. Amazon suggested a documentary. And so a peculiar situation emerged. Secular liberalism, which in the West meant criticizing power, suddenly became in the Arab world a tool of power. It wasn't there to liberate people. It was there to distract them. As long as you were free to wear what you wanted, tweet half-thoughts, and identify as a sapient being of choice, the deeper question of who ruled you and how was irrelevant. Chapter 4. A brief note from the Galactic Manual of Doomed Civilization's Guide to Authoritarianism. If ever you find yourself in a society where you are free to consume but not to choose your rulers, where you may criticize religion but not the king, and where Western diplomats praise progress, while ignoring prisons full of poets, you are not in a democracy. You are in a showroom. Also, bring a towel. Regimes don't provide them. Chapter 5. The beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning. Of course, nothing lasts forever. The youth were learning, not just how to code or to dance to algorithm-approved music, but to question. They began to see that secular liberalism, when imposed by a dictator, was just the emperor's new outfit. It wasn't freedom, it was aesthetic tyranny. And so, somewhere between the Quran app and an Instagram reel, between a banned lecture and a smuggled philosophy book, the thought took root. If our rulers fear our beliefs, maybe those beliefs are more powerful than we thought. And that, dear hitchhiker, is why authoritarian regimes fear not bullets or bombs, but ideas, especially the ones they can't rebrand. Chapter 6. The Curious Afterlife of the Caliphate. To no one's surprise, least of all the galactic archivists, the Caliphate died. It was declared thoroughly, officially, and repeatedly deceased sometime after World War I, when European empires, experts in inheritance theft, decided that Arabs would be better off divided, infantilized, and managed like badly behaved boarding school students. The funeral was held in Lausanne, the eulogy written in French, and the mourners were mostly colonial officers, sipping tea and carving borders with rulers, the kind you find in both classrooms and parliaments. Western historians, always fond of a strong ending, assumed that was that. The caliphate is over, the Ummah is fractured, let them have flags and airports. What they didn't realize is that the Ummah, the global Muslim community, had not received the memo, mostly because it was written in diplomatic French and buried under mandatory visa requirements. And so the Muslims, bless their overextended passports, wandered for a century, stateless but stubborn, like a people who knew they had lost something important but couldn't quite remember what it was. Some said it was dignity, others said sovereignty. A few pointed to the fact that they now had to ask permission from unelected Gulf monarchs just to pray or from European consulates just to visit a cousin. Still, the caliphate remained, not alive exactly, but not quite dead either. Like an old operating system, it lingered in memory, occasionally glitching into consciousness during conversations at dinner tables, late-night prayers, or particularly frustrating border crossings. Chapter 7. Rediscovering the Ghost. Around the 100-year mark, give or take a few coups, Muslims started to notice something. Despite decades of dictators, artificial wars, liberal nation-states, satellite-fed entertainment, and 3 different versions of moderate Islam, all state-approved TM, things weren't going so well. Refugees were drowning. Resources were being sold to fund skyscrapers with indoor ski slopes. Scholars were silenced, oil barons were knighted, and nobody could explain why freedom always stopped just before Palestine. And yet, in the back of many minds, one forbidden idea kept resurfacing like an inconvenient pop-up ad. What if we actually had a unified political system based on our values? Not a caliphate, as in a guy on a camel with a sword, no, but a caliphate, as in political accountability grounded in divine law, governance rooted in moral responsibility, not monarchic PR, a shared economic system that protected resources instead of auctioning them to the highest bidder. It wasn't a nostalgic fantasy, it was a proposal, a forgotten blueprint. And ironically, the very problems that haunted the West, migration, terrorism, economic instability, perpetual war, seemed less likely to thrive in a world where the Muslim world was actually governed by Muslims. Chapter 8. What the Caliphate could actually do besides wear a hat. The galactic policy wonks had assumed Muslims couldn't manage themselves without strongmen in sunglasses. But strangely enough, when people feel represented, they don't tend to bomb things or flee across oceans. Hear what a functioning, post-authoritarian, Islamically anchored caliphate might do. 1. End the resource looting. Oil, gas, and rare earth minerals wouldn't be filtered through offshore accounts and PR firms. The wealth would belong to the people who walk on the land it comes from. Shocking concept, we know. 2. Stop mass migration. If people had jobs, dignity, housing, and rulers who didn't imprison them for tweets, they wouldn't have to float across the Mediterranean on inflatable regret. 3. Undermine extremism. Without brutal dictators crushing dissent and fueling alienation, the ideological void that radical groups exploit would shrink dramatically. A legitimate Islamic governance system is actually extremism's worst nightmare. 4. Create real peaceful coexistence. A caliphate wouldn't mean war, it could mean stability, structure, and actual pluralism. The kind where Christians, Jews, and others lived under Islamic governance with rights, contracts, and actual protection, unlike, say, post-democracy Libya. 5. End puppet politics. No more foreign-backed thrones or rented parliaments, just leaders who fear God more than American sanctions. And contrary to Western fears, such a system might reduce chaos rather than expand it. After all, you don't bomb countries with stable borders and dignified leadership. You bomb fragile states that can't shoot back and are busy signing IMF deals. Chapter 9. The Last Taboo. Of course, speaking openly about a caliphate is still the fastest way to get yourself flagged, banned, or suddenly unavailable for comment. Even suggesting the idea triggers an international allergic reaction. The irony. Liberal democracy allows you to believe in anything except political Islam. But history has a sense of humor. The caliphate, supposedly buried, disgraced, medieval, continues to haunt boardrooms, palaces, and embassies. Because deep down, they know the truth. You can kill the caliphate. You can erase it from textbooks. But you cannot erase the idea that Muslims should rule themselves by their own values. Not forever. Epilogue. Notes from the Galactic Manual of Doomed Civilizations. The Caliphate. Status. Discontinued but pending update. Compatible with Tawheed, justice, and a functioning moral compass. Not compatible with tyrants, foreign military bases, or neoliberal talking points. Known issues. Often misunderstood, occasionally hijacked, never quite forgotten.